Thank you so much for joining. We are talking about artificial intelligence, security, and Salesforce. And it's a topic that comes up in practically every conversation I've had with folks because we are all very concerned about the risks that come with AI, particularly generative AI. And if I'm going to use my customer data, my business data that's sitting in Salesforce. So what are those risks? What do you need to consider? How do you address them? That's kind of the topic of the day. And let me start with a little bit of introduction. My name is Saurabh Gupta. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cloud Compliance and GPTfy. We are a Salesforce App Exchange ISV partner focused primarily on data security, artificial intelligence, privacy, compliance, things like that. With that, a little bit of a safe harbor disclaimer for some of you who may be familiar with it. This is not legal advice. This is not Salesforce's point of view. This is our individual perspective that's just shaped by, meeting with a lot of customers, working in the trenches, being on the receiving end of some of these technologies ourselves. So everything in this document, in this session from our speakers is all for informational purposes only. Take it for what it's worth from that perspective. Again, it's not legal advice. So with that, I will move on. A bit of a thank you to our sponsors. We are very appreciative of all those folks who've put in their time and effort to make this event a reality. And this is how this kind of was comprised of. The whole idea is that you have a group of sessions which are on the possibilities with AI. So sales, service, health you've done, and there's a few more happening. And then on the ability to deliver with AI, right? What can you actually do if you wanted to decide to go down this path of deploying AI in your enterprise? So here we are on security. There are some other interesting areas that we covered in the past, and there are some more to come in the coming days. With that out of the way, a little bit more on agenda I briefly touched upon earlier. We're going to talk a little bit about security in terms of what are the key points. If you were to go into your organization and say, we are going to do AI on Salesforce or elsewhere, what are some of the key talking points with your CISOs? What are some of the concerns that these folks may have, rightfully so, and how can you address them? What are legitimate challenges around Salesforce security when you think about it? So there are challenges with AI because you're bringing in this new technology into your organization. And what do you need to do on the Salesforce side to safeguard and protect and make sure that your customer data is not inadvertently exposed or unduly accessible by unauthorized agents. So that's kind of what our conversation is going to be. We'll talk a little bit about some other considerations in Salesforce to mitigate these from a compliance, residency, architecture perspective. And we have some resources for you where you can access the recording, some PDFs, an ebook on security, things like that. With that out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to Doug for introduction. Doug, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Saurabh, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Looking forward to have this presentation today. It's going to be really exciting for me as well. I founded Platinum 7 a little while ago, 2 years ago, actually, after I left Salesforce, because I saw a gap in the market around security, and that's what I focused on purely, Salesforce security. And if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, it might have a bit more of information on there for us. So after 13 years at Salesforce, I decided to start my own business, as I said, focusing purely on security. And main things I do for customers is do assessments. When I get to my section in a little while after Vernon, we'll be discussing a little bit about what I've seen and what I think you should do around security when it comes to AI. So a little bit about me, there's some information there for you in the deck. You'll be able to get a copy of all this sort of stuff. So please feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or directly after this if you have any further questions. But looking forward to the session, and over to you, Vernon. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, to introduce myself, I'm Vernon Keenan. I'm the publisher and writer at salesforcedevops.net. I work as a senior industry analyst. It's my job to critique Salesforce and to look at the ecosystems and understand new trends and so forth. I've actually been in the Salesforce ecosystem from the very beginning. I was hired by Mark Benioff at Oracle in the mid-90s and was a consultant for them back at the Telegraph Hill days. And nowadays, I've got a lot of in-depth knowledge. I've been in the industry for 45 years. I've got a lot of in-depth knowledge on software engineering, software development, DevOps, and so forth. And I started up my DevOps practice within Salesforce about 3 years ago, basically because we have so far to go. We have so far to go with DevOps. There's so much to teach, so much to share. And I love doing that. And it's my interest in software engineering that's turned me into an AI expert in Salesforce as well. Okay, so I think what we're going to do now is we're going to go through some key points on, your being a CISO or being a Chief Information Security Officer within an organization, and how you're going to be dealing with AI and security. So definitely got some thoughts about that. Now, we were talking about this in the pre-show, but this date is May. There was a big news story about how a Samsung engineer got disciplined because somehow his code wound up inside of ChatGPT. That they were able to generate something out of ChatGPT where there was evidence that the code came from Samsung. And I've actually personally experienced this myself over on GitHub Copilot, where I've had it generate comments using people's real names and things like that coming out of it. So I think around this time when this happened, it basically set off like a big red alert, a big bomb went off, where a lot of CISOs and other security officers and IT leaders within their organizations said, I'm not going to let this happen to me. So they immediately put a block on the OpenAI domains and to stop people from using it. So I think this was the reaction that happened back in the spring when we were all sitting there with our mouth wide open, looking at what ChatGPT could do. And I think a lot of software engineers feel the pressure all the time now to use it because of how much better it can make you as a software engineer. And this impacted the whole global community on how they look at these chatbots and the fact that one of the perceived reasons why they were unleashed on the public was to gain training data. And that is actually true with the consumer version of ChatGPT. So this was a justified fear, I think, especially in the early days, but it caused confusion. And we'll go on to the next slide. We can talk about that. So I think, you've got basically two sides of ChatGPT, of OpenAI. I should be specific. OpenAI, as a cloud service provider, has a consumer service called ChatGPT that you can log into, you can access it. It has all kinds of wonderful features, like it has memory, it has the ability to save your threads, it has this uncanny ability to refine itself through a conversation. And these are all features that OpenAI put out there to entice the public to use it. And indeed, they're copying all of the training, all the data that people put in there, and they're using it for training. However, for enterprise applications, really from the beginning, any developer or any system integrator who understood what move that OpenAI made, it was actually back in March, where they decided that they were not going to take any API calls and use that for training. So you essentially, we've had for about 6 months now enterprise solutions available, and this is how GPTfy works, and how Einstein architecture is going to work. Is that basically there are services within Azure, AI services, or now even directly with with OpenAI. They just announced yesterday a chat version, a private version of ChatGPT that also, like their API, does not train and is not copying business data. And you've been able to run Open API stuff safely for the last 6 months if you knew exactly how to do it. But I think we still have this big overhang. People are still scared, and for good reasons. Next slide. There's a tension, right? There's a tension. So you have the grunt work is this is something we've been talking about the whole week in the conference. And we have the ability for the grunt work to be automated with AI. It translates into wins, but there's a giant overhang. Is it safe? Am I doing it safely? And we still don't have firm answers on this. So go to the next slide and start talking about that. Well, yeah, okay. So let me talk about this. So the way we deal with this is that the AI architectures in Salesforce have a basic premise where they're going to put a huge fence around all of your data processing. Even things like models that they run internally are going to be inside of this AI, this security boundary within the Salesforce clouds. But if what you're doing is communicating with OpenAI, like how GPTfy works and other products like that, the reason why you can feel somewhat secure about it is that on the AI service provider side, they have precautions. They have things like SOC 2, they can implement HIPAA, they can implement all kinds of security for your particular data. So the fact that your data is being managed within a secure tenant is, I think, a reasonable way to move forward. And also, of course, we've got end-to-end security in terms of transit and other compromises. So next slide. So now I'm just going to go over some of these challenges that you're facing when you're an enterprise AI or enterprise IT leader or a CISO and you're confronted with this. The next slide, go over into that. So I think, here's my prescription on what to do about security is that you have to understand the overall importance of it. You need to implement robust measures that actually take your policies into action. You need to balance your innovation and responsibility, meaning I wouldn't be exposing things like chatbots to customers necessarily just because it sounds cool. I think that you're going to have all kinds of guardrails, and depending on your industry, all kinds of concerns that are going to be specific to you. You're going to have a big responsibility to communicate with people. One thing in this whole security issue is the shadow GPT problem. Even though we just talked about how OpenAI just created an enterprise plan, not everybody's going to be signing up for that right away. So what you've got currently in your organizations is a serious shadow GPT problem where people are using their mobiles or other unauthorized access, probably using the consumer chatbot to do work with the GPT-4 large language model. So there's a lot of educating and communicating about how that's dangerous, needs to go on. And also with this AI stuff, you need to be adaptive. You need to have some sort of way, like through a center of excellence mechanism or some sort of skunkworks mechanism, where you're in your company, you have people whose job it is to figure out what's coming next. Next slide. So my prescription for this is right now that you need one of these. You need an LLM cloud security framework. You can't buy one right now. You can't architect, you can't consult with this. You might find a few consultants who can help you with this. But I just tried to lay down 5 principles here that you can use to create your own security framework, your own set of checklists. And I think that's what's needed right now to back up your efforts to get into the using LLMs securely. And I think you need a data protection policy. You need to be able to identify which compliance, in your industry, what are your compliance, exposures that you have to be in charge of? What kind of transparency issues do you have if you're doing, for example, we're going to talk more about this, but explainability, how does, when a chatbot comes up with an answer, then you're asking it a question, how do you know it's the right answer? How do you know that it's giving you good information? Another thing that you want to examine from the vendor is how they can restrict access to different users within your organization to features of the chatbot. And that actually just came out with the OpenAI Enterprise announcement yesterday. They do have some granularity in that, and they also have some ability to share prompts and workspaces. So I think getting access to certain prompts, getting access to certain kinds of functionality is probably going to be restricted by role in many organizations. So I think access control and how does the service provider do this? And finally, how do you judge the security posture of this LLM service provider? Can you what evidence and documentation do they give you that proves that they are doing what they say they're going to do? Because you can have all kinds of great policies, but if they're not implemented, if there's a shoddy organization implementing a supposedly great policy, I don't think you're going to have a great result. So there is a certain amount of just evaluating the quality of your LLMs. Service providers' security posture is another thing. So I hope these 5 items give you a checklist as like a starting point for how to do your own evaluations.
Yeah, and I want to jump in a little bit here, Vernon, if that's okay. I think the thing that you mentioned, which I really like, and I want to make sure our audience is aware of, is like there is really no ready-made, just add water and microwave solution for this today. But as Doug will dive into some of these areas, the good news is what you can do with Salesforce, because it does come with a fairly robust set of enterprise controls. There are some things you can do on the AI side where you can lock it down, and vendors are working, like the GPTfy Enterprise. So I mean, if you are in a consultant role, if you are internal to an organization, and if you are tasked with looking at this, know that there are ways of approaching this and addressing it, and we will get into a fair bit of detail. But to Vernon's point, there is no like, I just turn key and kaboom, it's all done for me. I think it's just the natural evolution of a new disruptive technology. Because apparently there was a time when doctors were recommending that people should smoke. So we've gone beyond that time. So we are at that time here with the AI that, there are things that you can do and things that are terrible right now and you shouldn't do. And there are certain degree of guardrails and safeguards you can put in place. It's just that, to Vernon's point, and I'm sure as Doug will dive a lot deeper into it, those are things that are nascent, they are emerging, evolving, and there's not that much information about it. So I'm really glad that, all of us here are talking about it, and please do put in if you have any questions on that.
I think the thing that's interesting about a lot of the AI stuff, there's like 3 basic levels. There's the level that I've been talking about primarily, which is the API level where you're using it. And then I think, there's the layer below that, where you're developing your large language model, like a custom thing, and you're training it. And then, the bottommost layer is like where OpenAI is actually building the AI models. And I think the thing that's similar about that is it's all very similar to ISO networking or the thing that's kind of good about this is that it's somewhat similar to distributed cloud computing architectures to begin with. So I think a lot of the best practices we learn in Salesforce and other realms are going to help us here. So next slide.
All right. Oops.
So I think we're going to the thing I want to definitely highlight is that the way a large language model works is that it uses a probability function inside of it. So when it makes a decision to give you information, it's actually kind of running a probability uh, function that could have a different result every time because it's running on a probabilistic uh, algorithm. And you can control that with the temperature setting when you do an API call. So if you lower it to like 0.2, you're probably going to get consistent answers, but they will be very boring. And then if you put it up to, 1.1, you'll get wildly different answers every time. So I think that is an issue that is fundamental and causes a whole new realm of problems that we have to watch out for. So I think when you're building your own LLM, and especially if you ever have customer facing activities, this thing about having a bias detector or having some sort of a cultural sensitivity detector within the chatbot architecture is critical. I think that you've got, especially if it's customer facing, that stuff can be very, very risky. It can be risky even in an internal facing structure if you have a large workforce. But I think that they are consequential. And it's one of the reasons why maybe your security posture is we don't deploy this stuff widely until we have a specific way that we know that we're dealing with bias and cultural bias. And the other thing that I think is very important at this stage with generative AI is that almost every application, in my view, should be a human in the loop co-pilot kind of application at this point. Because especially like I was watching the healthcare session earlier, and especially in that environment where, do no harm and other very, very cautious steps forward are always taken. I think that you can have some sort of way to deploy that if you have a human in the loop. And I think in software engineering, we see this for sure, that the human in the loop is kind of like a nice filter to realize that it's either generating bad code or when you run the compiler, it doesn't work. So I think another thing to consider, again, is this ability to adapt to change, to have change detectors out there so you can see when things are going wrong. And another thing to be concerned about, maybe not so much in the US, but in other regions, would be government regulation on this. So there could be the ability for governments to come in and restrict the use of chatbots in some respects. So this is another concern on the control and the regulatory side. Next slide. Excuse me. So again, this is I talked about it earlier. Non-determinism is the word to describe the probabilistic nature of a chatbot. And that is important to understand, important to see that as a platform, it's different in this respect. It's good for some things, you want it to be imaginative, then you want variability, and that's part of how it works to produce different results. But that is a problem. The next problem is drift. So let's take a scenario of where you have, let's say, a GPTfy template that you have, and it produces results that you like, and you've stored that as a prompt, as like a system prompt or a parameterized prompt, and you want it to produce consistent results all the time. The problem is that some of these large language models, especially the foundational ones, get retrained and redeployed on a fairly regular basis. So they may change. The whole data sets underlying them and the way their algorithms are working may change. And this is what's called drift. And so you need to monitor for drift and correct for it. So this is going to be a whole new realm of observability and whole new aspect of observability, monitoring, and logging that kind of goes into using AIs. And I think that you have mitigation measures for this basically by testing it all the time. And you also need to I'm going to skip that last point. So next slide. I think I'm done.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly add a point on it. I think so many of these things, Vernon, that you've spoken about are excellent areas that I know Doug is going to dive into a few of them, and I'm going to dive into a few of them as well. And these are real problems for people who are looking at AI. The good news is, like everything, it's the nature of the beast, right? Like technology evolves at a crazy pace, particularly in case of AI. And so many of these things I'm seeing are somewhat getting mitigated. And ironically, in some cases, they are getting aggravated. I mean, I get better result with OpenAI 3 than GPT-3 than versus GPT-4 sometimes. So there is a bit of the art and science around trying these out and making sure that you're getting the kind of results that serve your purpose.
Yeah, and another thing is we're still inventing this stuff. I mean, the thing, this happens all the time. Like in this area, I just talked about, how do you deal with a prompt like that? Well, essentially, you need to treat your prompts like code now, so that they are treated in that way. But instead of the underlying virtual machine, like if you're doing Java, your virtual machine, your JVM never changes, right? Well, this is like if you're running Java and your JVM changes all the time. So this is we need another set of disciplines, another set of design abilities and ways to look at this stuff to take advantage of the new technology. Oh yeah, okay, explainability. So one of the favorite ways I like to describe this stuff is that you want to have an executive thinking partner conversation with your chatbot, and you want to be able to have it explain why it came up with that answer, and that's a whole set of challenges. I won't go into that because I notice I'm running out of time on my segment, but I think it's really critical if you have these chatbot conversations, not so much a prompt engineering platform or GPTfy type application where you're generating stuff from a pre-designed prompt, but if you're actually typing in it and getting information back, if you're an executive getting that back, you need to have the facts have to be attributable. You have to know exactly where this stuff is coming from. And that's clearly a deficiency in most chatbots today. So next slide. And I only went 5 minutes over, I think. I don't know.
All right, Doug, you're up.
Thanks very much, everybody. And one of the things that I really think that Vernon hit on the head was making sure that you're aware of what is going on with your large language model. And I know that Salesforce has done a lot of work on this as well. They've got an ethics committee making sure that the artificial intelligence being used inside of the Salesforce environment is ethical, it doesn't have bias, et cetera, et cetera. It's a really very complex area, which I've just recently touched on learning myself. So when I saw a presentation from Salesforce about this, I thought it was pretty incredible. The bias, et cetera, which was explained very well, makes it something which I'd be very happy to use the Salesforce version. I'm very happy to use, obviously, GPTfy as well, because they're doing a lot of work in that area. And on that note, let's move across and have a look at how you actually can secure your stuff with Salesforce and a large language model. So on the right-hand side, you have your different versions of artificial intelligence. Now, you may want to use one of these, multiples of these, depending upon what your requirements are. Now, on the left-hand side, you've got Salesforce, and you've got your prompts going across through that tool, and then you get the answers coming back. Now, when Vernon was talking about prompts, what you're talking about there is either free text, where you say, can you please give me a limerick based around whatever, and that will then send back an answer. Actually, I found all the limericks that GPT actually gives me is pretty rubbish, but it's a good thing to try. But or get it to tell a joke, doesn't really work. But the point is, in the business sense, that's not really what you're looking at. You're looking at actually having a very, very controlled approach to actually accessing this information. So how do we make sure it's secure? Well, the most important thing is to have some form of security layer, and both GPTfy and Salesforce do this for you. And what does that actually do? We'll cover that next. But you should also have, as Vernon mentioned, limited access to who can actually run this stuff. Because until you understand exactly what's going on, it's actually going to be quite tricky to see if something does go wrong. You've got to make sure you actually have the controls around understanding that.
That was the logs and observability. factors too.
Exactly. And so understanding exactly why it said that is key. And then when we're looking at the API integration itself, you need to make sure you do that securely. And this is standard sort of Salesforce stuff. As you know, Salesforce has got a great security layer. It's got a great ability to control access to things, and it's got a very powerful API integration security capability as well. And there's one more build, I think, on that, Saurabh. So we're going to follow the best practice in that area as well. So in reality, this is the overview, like an architecture slide about how you're going to do this. Now let's talk about the detail behind it. So basically what you're looking at here is on the left-hand side, you have your Salesforce environment. And in that, you've got your opportunities, your cases, emails, activities, contacts, and maybe some custom object called strategy. Now, when you want to send a prompt, and this is basically just a text string that you send across with artificial intelligence, it sends back an answer. So what the prompt has to have is some form of content. So for example, in Salesforce, you may want to say with a very complex case, hey, ChatGPT or whomever you're asking as your large language model, can you please summarize this 85-page document? So one of the things that you need to do is take that case and then give it to that artificial intelligence tool. And as Vernon pointed out with the issue with Samsung, you've got to be careful with this. So what both GPTfy and Salesforce do is they identify and remove the PII out of that. So in a case, for example, it will take my name and replace it with person one. It'll take my email address, replace it with 123.123@.com, and then a product name, it'll replace with product one, for example. And so then it would say, here's my case notes. It replaces a lot of stuff in it, and then it gives it across the security layer into the artificial intelligence, which will then do its thing, send back the answer, and then what you have to do is reverse that identify and remove by identifying and replacing back the original one. So every time you see person one, you stick Doug. Every time you see 123@123.com, you replace it with my email address, etc. And that means that you get that that data given back to you, which then makes sense in your particular scenario. So you won't even notice any difference, but the OpenAI tool or the ChatGPT or whatever tool you're using will not actually get your data. It'll get just placeholders. And then after that result comes back, if you want to see the actual full result, like a summarization, that's fantastic. But sometimes just say, is this customer angry? And that can then set up a positive sentiment or a negative sentiment, that type of thing. And that's something that these tools can do relatively well, although I still think they have a challenge with sarcasm, because that can also be quite an interesting scenario. It's difficult for humans to get sarcasm, so I think artificial intelligence has a little way to go yet behind that. But the point is, having a security layer is key. And if you don't do this, this will cause you some serious challenges about sharing your intellectual property with a third party. And some of these tools have become better at becoming more secure, and you can get now your own version of it, et cetera, et cetera. But even so, I'd still be wary about putting in my, all of my IP into this tool and seeing what happens. But that's something which I think is a good basis for moving forward. So what we're going to be talking about next is actually how we're going to go around and do that. So with that, limiting your access is quite easy. So with Salesforce, you actually have got great controls over what happens. However, if you're building an Apex class that's going to pull data out of Salesforce and send it across to the artificial intelligence platform, you need to control that. Now, it's a little bit tricky if you're doing it inside of Apex, because obviously Apex can access anything you want it to do. But with the new controls that Salesforce will put into Apex, you can limit exactly what can be accessed by the user running that code by using the, instead of being with sharing, you can have that now with user mode. And that makes it really obvious that if you're going to be getting just the data that particular user can see. And then limiting access to the AI. So do you want to have it just for your internal staff, or maybe just a small portion of your internal staff, or do you want to share it with your community? And I think that becomes quite interesting as well, because as Vernon said, you've got to be very careful around sharing this with the general public, because if the tool comes back with an answer which is not great, and you're sharing it with your consumers, that's not going to be a good solution for you. So it's probably best to limit this down to a small user community until you are really confident that you've ironed out all the issues with the bias, et cetera, that Vernon spoke about a bit earlier on. Now, you could also expose this as a REST class using Salesforce Apex, and that means that your Lightning components can call it, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, you need to limit who can run that Apex code by using your profile or permission set, that sort of thing. You control exactly who can run what. And Lightning components, again, you can put them on certain pages and only certain people can see them because you have dynamic, you've got your dynamic control over the Lightning component with that capability that Salesforce has now produced. So you can say, if your profile has this particular setting, then yes, you can see this Lightning component, which means now you can interact with the artificial intelligence platform. So that's one way to actually limit your access, and I think you should do that all the time. GPTfy have already done that. If you're rolling your own, this is a good little starting point for you. Salesforce has done this automatically for you as well. So this is really just for people who are rolling their own or want to understand what's going on under the covers of GPTfy and also Salesforce's solution. And then on to the next point, we're going to be covering off the actual
Doug,
API.
I just wanted to reinforce that last point you were making, because I think you're talking about all the access controls and everything. So if this is one of the advantages of implementing such a project within Salesforce, is because we have so many of these things kind of built in.
Correct. Totally agree. Salesforce has got a fantastic platform for keeping data so secure. You need to configure it properly, but the platform itself has got so much capability there to keep your data safe that any mistake can definitely be controlled. That's for sure. Which is something which a lot of other platforms can't do.
I think it's a really profound point. I probably want to just riff on it for a minute or for 30 seconds here. The fact is, if you are a medium or a large enterprise, you have a ton of applications. And, now we are at a point where we have to make a big decision. Do I have an AI capability and try to wire it into every application I have in my enterprise? Or do I take one of those applications and use it as a vehicle to enable these capabilities? And Salesforce gives you such an incredibly good platform to do this, because one, it's already there, your folks are using it. It has a ton of security controls that Doug and Vernon talked about. It is mobile enabled. Like, there's all that really interesting aspect. But the other thing that we are seeing of late is, like, Salesforce has Salesforce Connect, which lets you connect to OData sources. So if you have data sitting in Oracle, SQL Server, other non-Salesforce environments, a lot of them are OData compliant, and you can basically just connect them. And for those of you who are older, it's like the ODBC for the new world.
Oh.
If you can just connect to that data source, and you can start showing that data inside Salesforce. You can even edit it. You can create new records. It's a lot of very compelling capability, and that thing has been around for a while, so it's not new. But what's interesting is, with these external objects, you're now pulling in data that does not even natively reside in Salesforce. And what we've done is, with GPTfy, you can actually send it through the security layer to AI, process it, and get responses back. So realistically, you're applying AI not only on data that is inside Salesforce, but you can bring in general ledger data, ERP data, returns data, transactional data, customer master data, some data from mainframe if you're FinServ or healthcare or somebody. And that whole idea that I can have this one layer of engagement for my users, for my partners, for my customers, but not only can I have that layer, but now I can really bring in data from other sources and kind of present more value added, enriched, more enabled AI oriented capabilities. I think that just opens up a whole new world of building newer, very compelling experiences for end users.
Yeah, thanks, Saurabh. Actually, the one thing I'm remiss about not speaking about that capability, because, and for those of you who haven't tried it yet, connecting to an OData endpoint is relatively simple. It's just point and click. There's no code required, which is very, very powerful. So if you are a coder, you can build your own custom adapter to connect to things as well. So if you want to connect to a live stock ticker and endpoint with a web service, you can do that via external objects. So there's a very, very capable environment there for you to actually access lots of information outside of Salesforce as well, and use Salesforce's security to then limit what gets sent across to the AI. So great catch, Saurabh, and thanks for adding that value. I think that is a very important point. So the next thing I want to discuss, and the last thing I'm talking about, is actually the API and integration security itself. So if you're rolling your own, this is really something we're talking about here, because GPTfy and Salesforce already got this under control. But what they're doing is actually making sure that when you connect to these other environments, it is as secure as possible, because you are sending across information which may not be your intellectual property per se, but it's definitely still sensitive. So what you want to do is actually make sure that when you are connecting to these tools, you're using Salesforce capabilities to help keep this as secure as possible. So you're using named and external credentials. And if you're doing that, preferably use JWT as the approach for authentication. That stands for Java Web Token, so JavaScript Web Token. And it's just a great way to actually have authentication between two servers without having to have a password. It makes it so much easier and so much more secure. And even at the network layer itself, using mutual TLS is actually quite a powerful tool, because what that means is when we use our browser and we connect to google.com, for example, you get the little lock appearing in the top left-hand corner. What that is saying is that the TLS certificate on that server matches the name that you typed in. So you can be sure that you're going to the proper Google rather than something else, because the certificate matches. With mutual TLS, that works at both ends. So when you connect to the server, it says, great, can you please send me your certificate? And then the server will check back to the client and say, hey, yes, you are Doug, and therefore we're fine. So in a server-to-server environment, it's actually doing bidirectional checking of the endpoints before it sends any data at all across the network, which is a very powerful feature. And then moving on to the next bit, limiting access to API users. So this is when you may have an external .NET app or a Java app that actually does that communication to the artificial intelligence platform for you. That application needs to connect back into Salesforce to actually update and gather information. So to do that, I would suggest using the new integration user license that Salesforce has provided for us. Everyone has 5 of them, and you can buy them, I think, for $120 US a year, which is remarkably inexpensive for a Salesforce license that gives you access to nearly everything. So, and also it frees up one of your other licenses that you're probably using today for integration, frees it up for a human, which is much better value. So anyway, getting back to the point, using this integration user license means that you can really control how the access from that artificial intelligence app comes back into your version of Salesforce, because you can limit it down by permission sets to only being able to access the objects and fields required to do the integration. This is just best practice for any integration you do with Salesforce. You shouldn't use System Administrator as your API access user. It just is bad, 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 because you're giving the third party full control of your Salesforce environment. They can actually shut you all down, and that's perfectly legitimate because you gave them access to do that. So this new integration user license is a great way to actually save money, but also control access to your environment. And then lastly, when we're coming to talk about your AI instances, so if you're in production, you've got your controls over what can be sent to the AI tool. But if you're in non-production, so in development, your developers may be doing a whole bunch of things, just trying to test things out, and they could easily run up a huge bill on your artificial intelligence platform. So being able to have separate AI accounts and put flow control on them to make sure you can't hit it with too many requests or put a cap on how much you're spending is a very good, important thing, because we've always heard some of these horror stories about when someone racks up a $4 million bill on AWS with a credit card because it's just gone wild. You've done a whole bunch of stuff. So these things are, I think, important things just to think about when it comes to building your application securely. And this is all about having a third-party tool coming back into Salesforce. And on that note, I'm finished. So let's hand over to Saurabh for a bit of a wrap up around the data residency architecture and a bit of a demo as well. So thank you for your time, folks. Look forward to having some questions come through at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Doug. I think this was a great call out on some of these areas. Whether you're doing AI or not, these are still really good practices to follow for any integration. A vast majority of these are just tried, tested over the years. And, Doug and I have been in the Salesforce ecosystem for many, many years, dealing with a lot of these thorny issues for highly security conscious customers. And I know Vernon has a sheer diversity of experience along those lines as well. So now some of the areas that Vernon mentioned around compliance and, bias, toxicity, some of those, let's jump in and see a little bit of how can we address them, with the sort of architecture that we've been talking about. So here is an example of some of those areas that will come up. You may have regional privacy law that you need to comply with. You may have GDPR, CPRA, and new privacy laws are coming up. India has one, Australia is revamping some, and they have a lot of these. Singapore has, like, the world has a lot of privacy laws, and they are now getting updated in some places, particularly Europe is very aggressively doing it around AI. How do you address that, right? You're a global company with folks in US, in other countries, and you are also in a lot of countries in Europe. And now, do I do AI or not do AI, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk some of these ethical considerations that AI kind of is still evolving into around bias, toxicity, hallucination, and see what we can do in some of those areas. We'll talk about data residency requirement. I mean, we have a Australian on the call here, and Australia has pretty strong data residency requirements. And we'll talk about how would you do this if you're trying to use AI, because hey, where's my AI going to sit? Do I have it in the US or is it hosted in Australia? And that may be a question for folks. And then we'll talk a little bit about data security and access, much in line with what Doug was mentioning. So let's jump into it. Here is a sort of requirement that I've heard typically from a lot of our customers and prospects that we are doing pilots with for GPTfy, right? You want to enable AI in specific geographies because you want to align with laws. So I may be a global company with one large Salesforce instance that's serving multiple folks, and I only want to use AI with specific users who are in the United States. I don't want my EU users to access AI. So that's a requirement that comes up, and you want to be able to have that kind of granular control at a user level to do this. The other part of this, which is really fascinating, is even if I was doing this, right, the bigger issue is whose data am I using AI on? If I'm using AI on customer data, like, where are those customers located? Where are those prospects located? If they are in EU, well, then GDPR applies. Like, do I have the ability to be smart about this and only apply AI to regions where it is appropriate for my organization to do so? Or do I get an explicit consent from them, which is required, I think, under GDPR, right? Or do I have a legitimate basis? And when you think about options here, you want the ability for your prompts to only process records where the location is in alignment. Maybe I say, use this prompt where the contact, country is US, right? Or is not EU, right? Region is not EU, something like that. Or where the contact's consent flag is checked for AI, right? Or I only do it for use cases where my legal counsel thinks it is okay. These are legitimate bases under GDPR, so it's okay for me to do that, right? So those are some of the examples. And what we ended up doing is in GPTfy, we actually narrowed it down, and I'll show that in a demo if we get around to it in a minute. But the idea is that you have prompts which you can control not only by object and what data we are sending, what fields we are sending, all of that, but also by profile, right? And also by record type. So if I had different record type for my customers between Europe and US, I can apply that. If I had record type between prospects and customers, and I may have a legitimate basis because someone is a customer, I can apply that as a filtering mechanism for whose data I'm processing and where. And also in terms of access to these, in our product, and I'm sure that's probably true for Salesforce's AI Cloud and a bunch of, whatever else you end up building, you may want to think about. So our products are feature licenses. So you can give it to on a user by user by user basis. So you can even have tighter control on which users actually have access to these kind of capabilities. So again, it's not, back to what Vernon's comment was, right? There is no really turnkey answer, but for any smart Salesforce professional, thankfully, they are in the Salesforce ecosystem, which has a ton of things that you can apply to basically just, lock it down to areas where it is kosher for you to use it. Vernon, any comments?
Yeah, it just reminds me again how many security features Salesforce already has. I think that there's so many things, as an analyst, I hate to praise any one vendor, but there are so many things that are pointing towards Salesforce as a good solution for building AI apps, and this is one of them.
Totally agree.
True. All right, with that, So let's talk about another really important area which Vernon touched about, and this is a concern for a lot of customers, which is hallucinations, right? AI can hallucinate, its imagination can just go all around, right? And you want it to, because in a lot of B2B scenarios, we want it to be more deterministic. We are not asking AI to write me, the script of a movie, right? I'm just saying, hey, summarize these records for me or do sentiment analysis. So in the business context, we want it to be more deterministic and most of the times less imaginative. And fortunately, you have some ability, which Vernon pointed to, which is around you can adjust the temperature of your AI. So you can reduce the temperature. A lower temperature means it's going to be less imaginative and more deterministic, right? And so we were, we had to address all of these things very early when we were building GPTfy. And so we did this, right? And we gave controls to our customers so you can tweak AI temperatures, and you can do it specifically. If you have multiple AIs, you can do it specifically at an AI by AI by AI connection level. The other part of this is, how do you still prevent AI from misinterpreting your request, right? How does it know that the number that you just sent in is a social security number, or is it a phone number, or is it some other kind of an order number, right? So the two things here that are really, really important is, one is your prompts need to be extremely well grounded. They need to really set the context for AI. So it is not misinterpreting. It's not thinking, oh, I thought you wanted this where you actually wanted that, right? The second part of this is all the data that we send to AI is extremely well tagged, right? Like there is no, the possibility that AI can still misinterpret is there, but it is extremely low because all of that information is tagged. We are not just saying Saurabh Gupta 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, and AI is going, well, is it a social security number? Is it his passport number? Is it his driver's license? So you have the ability to do some of those things to prevent or limit how much it can hallucinate. So here's an example in our product, right? Like you can set temperature at a connection level, and we are working on bringing it at a prompt level so you have even more flexibility to reduce this. The other area is around bias and toxicity, and I'm going to talk about this slide, and I'm very curious after this. I want Vernon and Doug to respond if they have something to add to this. But bias and toxicity is a fairly large challenge, right? And I think Doug, Vernon talked about this, right? So the first thing that I 100% agree with, and I think we should continue to endorse as technologists, is human in the loop. Like these technologies are not at a point where you're like gonna let it be a Robocop that just goes around. You want it to be semi-automated. You want it to completely automate your grunt work, but then present it to you, the end user, right? I want it to write an email draft, not to just generate an email and send it to my customers. Like those things, it's not there. No matter what the marketeers, product company people, or whoever else tells you that, oh, this is so simple. A lead comes in, you look at some stuff on it, you look at their IP address, and oh, this is from Italy. I'm going to send them something with an Italian flavor. Bad idea. Actually, it is a bad example for AI anyways, because they are probably going to ban a lot of it. But the whole intention here is that you want a human in the loop. It's an awesome technology to let you have a generated draft that you can look at, and it reduces that time. You may be able to eliminate 40, 50, 60% of grunt work for a salesperson, but now they have a draft that they can start with versus doing it from scratch. Along the same lines, and I think Vernon had mentioned this earlier, you want to enforce an AI quality assurance policy for toxicity. These AI engines will continue to change. Unlike the Java virtual machine where you were like asked and you clicked a button to update your version, or you actually manually updated, these things are not waiting. They're just gonna keep on upgrading, and they're like, congratulations, you've got the just freshly baked thing in. So you want to have very regular data audits. You want these technologies to, everything gets logged, everything gets audited, and you do some sort of a sample QA type things to make sure that this is not going haywire. So here is an example of very well tagged data that I was mentioning earlier. You can see that I have information on the left. Before we send it to AI, we remove all of the PII that you can see. Her email is this email is replaced with removed and removed, right? Like we are doing a lot of that. The second part is you're seeing everything is tagged, right? This is a description. This is a case comment on this. This is a case number, right? We are not leaving it for AI to try and figure out what exactly this might be. I'll take a pause. Vernon, I know you have a lot of thinking. You've done a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think go back one slide. I think I agree with all this. I think, and even in the previous slide, you talked about grounding. I think the way we're going to deal with this is partly by technology and by orchestrations that happen in the background, but while the chatbot's running, or to maybe pre-train it a little bit. I think when you're talking about it's an advanced topic, but you could, in terms of if you built your own chatbot, you could have an orchestration layer that takes vector, looks for documents in your company that are related to a search. It could always inject, for example, guidelines and manuals and instructions on how to communicate and things like that could be automatically put into the context of the chatbot. So I think a couple things that are rolling along in technology that are going to fix this is AI orchestration in the background, AI engineering to kind of bring in more facts to create the grounding. And then I think the other thing is the context windows, how much the chatbot can understand at once is growing considerably. And this is a competitive feature amongst the different chatbots. So we should expect to see that going up. So the more information you can cram into it, the more accurate it's going to be.
Very well said. Doug, do you have any comment on any of this?
No, I can't add anything more to what you've both said. I think it's very important, though, to do things like keep humans in the loop, because that's something to do with security, right? You don't want it to generate stuff and send it. It's actually very, very important. So we've got a couple of questions come in as well towards the end, so we could try and get to them before we wrap up.
Absolutely. I think, I noticed that too. Let's quickly wrap this up then. So data residency was the third one. And one of the things we built was ability to connect to multiple AIs. So you can connect to different AI instances. So that way, if you have information that needs to only be processed in Australia, you can basically connect, have an AI provisioned that is in Australia, that's running in a data center that's physically in Australia. And you then have the ability to ensure that you can meet those kind of requirements. So there is a little bit of nuance here. I'm sure eventually these companies will figure out, maybe you just connect to one OpenAI and you can tell it where you want it to go, and it just kind of redirects it. Today, we are not there, but you definitely have the ability to.
Data residency is a big issue for OpenAI users because it's just US right now.
Correct. That is true. And even on Azure, OpenAI today is not available for, like, Australia in particular. We have a customer who wants to use, and it's not available. I think the good news is they're all teething problems, right? There is enough economic incentive for these to be eliminated, and it's only a matter of time. I kind of feel like we are at that very sort of early, we are at that cusp of where this is going to happen in another 6 to 12 months. So much of this will happen because every large provider of these things, whether it's Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, Cohere, Cloud, Anthropic, all of those, they're all racing to address these things because there's money to be made. So I think that will address a lot of these. So that brings us to demo. I know we are at time, so let's do this. Let me quickly show a little bit of resources. Let's answer some of the questions that are up there. And then if we still have an appetite, we may just kind of look at some of the demos. In terms of resources, there is a lot of good stuff here. This is an ebook that Doug and Platinum 7 and VA Cloud Compliance put together, which talks about all the things that you want to think about around data security when it comes to your Salesforce instance. Like, even if you're not doing AI, this is a lot of extremely good content. And Doug has a remarkable degree of experience in this, so I'm very glad that we got to put this together. All of our resources are available from one single place. So you can go to this LinkedIn link. This bit.ly is a LinkedIn group link, or you can scan the QR code and get access to this PDF. Extremely useful. We have a roadmap on AI. Again, same link. Just go there and you will find, you can get this PDF. There is a data sheet for GPTfy and what we do. Same place. You can go there. All of our videos are getting recorded. same place. You can just go there and get access to all of these recordings that we are doing. And that's pretty much it. Let's jump into some Q&A here. I'm going to ask, let's start with, can AI be a double-edged sword in terms of security? If yes, how? I don't know.
Yes, that's what we just said for the last hour.
I actually think that a lot of the times people are thinking about, could you use AI for bad things? And that's cropped up a lot in podcasts I listen to. The CISO series actually discuss that quite a bit. And it's being used by some nefarious people to help build better phishing emails and that type of scenario. But I don't think that AI specifically is a double-edged sword in terms of security. I think any tool that you have is a double-edged sword in terms of security. Depends upon who's holding the weapon, depending if it's a protective weapon or an offensive weapon. So it just depends upon it's just the way it is. So you need to be aware and you need to be in control. But I think, yes, it could be, but the point is everything could be. So that's one of the things where just make sure you're aware, conscious, and you're doing what you should be doing to make sure your data is safe.
It's a tool like any other, ranging
Correct.
from a hammer to an atomic bomb,
Totally correct.
Great. I'm going to take the next one is, what are the upcoming trends in AI and security that Salesforce users should be aware of? I think, Vernon, you covered a little bit when you started talking about OpenAI for enterprise, but I'm curious if you or Doug have anything else to add to that.
I think it's after you, Vernon.
Just the trends are happening every day to be aware of. Like I said, you need to have, if you're a big company, you need a team of people to be tracking this stuff and to be aware of what's going on. There's so much activity. We're at the peak of the Gartner hype cycle right now, and we're going to have new companies, new services, new things coming online. If you adopt something, you're probably going to be unadopting it in 6 months and going for something else. So I think it's extremely dynamic, and I'm serious that if you're in a 10,000 person company, you should have like a team of 7 or 8 people whose job it is to figure this stuff out, to be forward looking.
Definitely, when you're looking at building your own tools, that's definitely the way. I think Salesforce themselves, they've got a very, very large team internally working on this. So they've done a lot of the work for you. So even smaller companies can use Salesforce's AI tools because they've done all that work for you. You're still got to be aware and be conscious of what's going on, but they've done a lot of that work behind the scenes. So it's very powerful. Same with GPTfy as well. As you saw, Saurabh and the team have done a great job of actually making sure that what is sent across is anonymized, et cetera, and well grounded and set up to actually work appropriately. So that's one of the things where just having these fly-by-night guys come and say, I can hook up your tool to GPT is not a good idea. You should be going through people who've got some serious understanding of what things could go wrong and how you're going to control that beforehand.
Yeah, and like if your organization has decided that you like going with a vendor, the one throat to choke kind of philosophy, then Salesforce is extremely well positioned to be an AI service provider in that sense. I think the trend is to look for is that if you're a conservative CISO and you really want that one throat to choke kind of ability to go to one vendor, I think waiting around to see what's happening in Q1 and Q2 in terms of product availability from Salesforce is going to be a big deal.
Yep, totally agree.
True. Very well said. Let me pull the next one here. Will Salesforce be able to guarantee data security with AI integrated soon or in near future? Interesting question. I mean, why don't you just talk about?
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're essentially putting their chief value forward. Trust is our greatest value, and they're building on that. And the fact that they had that out there, and you've got this untrustworthy, non-deterministic AI thing going, and so it's marketing brilliance. This is the thing I've noticed about Benioff ever since I worked for him, how many years ago. It comes together kind of brilliantly, and it addresses the issue. And the thing that makes an analyst like myself, I'm naturally suspicious of these things, but the thing that backs it up is they've got the Einstein program that's been going for 7 or 8 years. And they have their own research, and they have all of the things that kind of make me worried that they're going to go slow sometimes, like a lot of ethical people looking at this stuff. But on the other hand, I think just to reiterate how kind of pleased I am with the Salesforce direction. They're putting prompts at the center of everything, and I think that's a great philosophy and a way to kind of manage this stuff. So I think in terms of the question, there's a lot of stuff coming up, and I'd advise you, if you're conservative and you want that one throat to choke thing, that Salesforce might be a good vendor.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think the word guarantee is a little bit strong. You can't guarantee anything to anybody, but they're doing their utmost to make sure it's going to be safe as possible.
That was going to be my perspective too. Like, I think the word guarantee is just like, nobody's going to guarantee you anything at all, right? Like, the MSAs won't say this, EULAs won't say this, like nobody can, like, realistically and rightfully so. But I do agree that I think what you want is you want to look at products where the vendors have thought long and hard about it, right? We build security layers, Salesforce builds trust layers, somebody else will come in and they will build something. What you want to be sure of is it meeting your standards of data security? Is yours, if this was your data, I was on another webinar where we had some privacy folks, and they were saying, if this was your children's data, would you be comfortable with it? And I love that as a bar to think about, like, if it was your son or daughter's information in a Salesforce instance and somebody clicked a button to run AI, how comfortable would you feel? And I think that is a good way to think about this, because at the end of the day, we are the consumers, right? I bet our data is probably sitting in 150, 200 Salesforce orgs with Salesforce customers who, happen to be people that we buy from, the organizations we buy from. So I think, bearing that in mind, the idea of a trust layer, a security layer is definitely very, very useful. The other thing that I suspect, and this is me speculating, the other thing I suspect will happen is you're going to see all these AI vendors put in even more robust controls as things improve, because this is a huge barrier. This is a huge friction for them, right? Like, they are not interested in being a third party to some large company where the large company goes, I'm going to buy through Salesforce this capability for Anthropic, right? What a lot of these large enterprises want to do is they want to go directly to an AI vendor and they'll say, hey, I'm going to utilize your AI engine across my entire portfolio of applications. So if those large vendors, whether it's Anthropic or, cloud or, AWS, GCP, Azure, OpenAI, any of them and all of them, if those vendors can actually sell on that same premise that they are baking in a lot of this trust, that improves their ability to go direct to these consumers. And I completely suspect that there's a lot of money being spent right now, because nobody wants to be this back office AI engine, being retailed through a layer of enterprise business apps, whether it's Salesforce, SAP, in HubSpot or whatever, right? So I think you will see, it's great for us as consumers, right? You'll see this on both ends. You will see, solution vendors who are building these API wrappers and prompt engine, engineering platforms and stuff like that, whether it's Salesforce, GPTfy, others. You will see us investing more and more in making this more robust. But simultaneously, you will also see a lot of AI vendors doing their bit so that the overall level of this increases. That's my speculation. All right. The next one we have is, I'm going to take, what are the best practices for implementing AI and security features in Salesforce? I suspect we did talk a fair bit about it, but I know, Doug, I'm going to ask you first if you want to jump in, and then we can turn it over to Vernon.
I think that we covered a fair bit of it during the conversation. I'd be curious to know which particular points the question asker actually wants us to cover off, because I thought we basically covered off a fair bit of it during the conversation, but obviously we may have missed something which is important to them. So if you wouldn't mind, please clarifying your question, that'd be great. But unless Vernon has got more insight than me.
I think, well, the point we made was that we're kind of making it up as we go along to some degree right now. So I think there's a combination of existing practices for Salesforce, which are highly reusable in this situation. And then there's some unique large language model issues. And my recommendation for people right now is that you need to create an evaluation framework for deciding to do business with a large language model service provider. And I went over those in the talk. It's data protection, compliance, transparency, access control, and security posture of that particular vendor. And I think that those are your check. These are, it's up to you, I think, now to build out this framework, or maybe start looking at analysts like myself or Gartner, Forrester, one of these guys is going to start putting out advice on this. Because it's too dynamic. We don't really know what it is, and there is no framework. You need to make your own. I think it's the answer to that question.
I would agree. Doug, anything you want to add to this?
No, that Vernon covered off really well. I think that's looking at the large language model, but then also, as Vernon said, the Salesforce has got a whole bunch of other controls which can be reused as we spoke about, and as you saw in the demo that Saurabh showed a couple of the screens. That sort of stuff is something which I strongly suggest you should be doing both. Look at the large language model security, but then also look at your Salesforce security and put them together as one team to make a solution which fits your requirements.
And that would be like following like the well-architected practices and things of that nature, right?
Yep, definitely.
So I think there's a lot of, the best framework is to do everything correctly as far as Salesforce goes, and then realize you have this non-deterministic, hard to manage, drifting beast that you decided to subscribe to, and you need new rules to figure out what are the security parameters for that.
Yeah, and I know, I wanted to very quickly just sort of highlight this ebook that we were talking about, because it has a lot of free tools that you can use. It's not specific to AI, but it's still a really good way to make sure that you are looking at some best practices to secure your application, your data, your org health, just generally do things. And all of these things, listed in it, all these resources are essentially available at no cost, right? We put this together a while back, and I think I got a lot of positive feedback on this. And Salesforce offers a ton of tools. I think it's really good to have one place where you can get all of these. And again, we'll share that in the link. So if you get a chance and if you're looking at this, you can definitely use it. All right, I know we went a little bit over, so I think I'll skip the demo for this one. Are there any other questions here that we haven't answered? Just sort of Salesforce ecosystem. Apart from using AI for enterprise, is it secure for me to use it for personal use? Are there security protocols? I
Use the API.
Yeah.
Use the API playground.
Yeah, have a play. I think the main thing is, if you are going to use this tool for your own use, be very, very careful what you put across in the prompt. Just be very careful what you put in there. Don't say, don't pass across your financial information and say, what's my best bet to buy shares, right? That's something you shouldn't be doing. You really should just be asking it to give you limerick, in my opinion. But that's
But I mean, the practical advice, if you're using ChatGPT in the regular way and you're paying for it, and you can have it remember your conversations. And if you're doing that, you're contributing to the knowledge base of OpenAI. Or you can go into the settings and turn off remember conversations. So you could have a fully engaged ChatGPT conversation and it won't remember it. The way to do it professionally, in my view, is to use the OpenAI playground, and you're using the API directly emulating the REST calls, and they, by their agreement, they don't use any of that data for training.
Yeah,
exactly. They changed the rules recently to make it a bit more obvious, because it used to be anything you give me, I keep. But now they're making that much more controlled, which is good to see.
Yeah, and I think Anthropic by Cloud, they talk a lot about how they safeguard your personal data, and they have a whole pledge around that. I think isn't it Anthropic or Cohere? One of them does.
Well, Anthropic has a different system for determining bias. It's called constitutional AI. It's a whole different theory.
Right. No, but I meant in terms of protecting your privacy, I think some of these are positioning themselves pretty strongly on that point of we don't share your data. We don't use it for training, hands off. And I think to Doug's point, OpenAI later kind of retracted away. I think initially they were like, yep, it's ours. We train. Our people may occasionally take a peek at what you're doing, but now we don't do it. So
no, the enterprise rules now. I think, you know, someone's got to pay for all the supercomputer running up in Redmond there.
that is true. That is true. Well, I know this has been a fascinating discussion, and we kind of went 15 minutes over. I think I really appreciate Doug and Vernon, you joining here and sharing your perspective. I have always learned a lot from both of you, and I hope folks who joined us also. All of this is getting recorded, and we will share the recordings. I think they'll also be probably on YouTube or LinkedIn. So, you know, folks, you would have an opportunity to look at it. And if you do need to reach out to Vernon or Doug or myself, we are all pretty visible on LinkedIn. And so please do reach out.
I'll talk to anybody.
There you go.
You want to tell me what you're doing with AI? Call me up.
Good, Doug.
Good. Thanks a lot, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. I enjoyed it as well. Happy to keep building out there.
Definitely. All the best.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.